being conducted pursuant to the provisions of the Brown Act to facilitate teleconferencing and to reduce the risk of COVID-19 transmissions at public meetings. Ordinarily, the Brown Act sets strict rules for teleconferencing. AB 361 suspends some of these rules during a state of emergency, where state and local health officials have recommended social distancing. The Brown Act continues to require that we notice meetings in advance to allow the public to participate. The Community Advisory Committee has met all the applicable notice requirements, and the public is welcome to participate in this meeting. If you wish to be recognized during public comment, please fill out a public comment speaker form found at ebce.org/meetings and use the raise hand feature in Zoom. You will be recognized for 3 minutes. Comments can also be submitted online at ebce.org/minutes. And with that, I would like to do a roll call. Member Landry.
Present.
Thank you. Member Hugh. Member Liu. Member Liu.
Present.
Thank you. Member Swaminathan.
Present.
Thank you. Member Lakshman.
I'm here.
Thank you. Member Talria. Member Talria. Member Pacheco.
Present.
Member Souza.
I'm here.
Member Carr. Member Carr. Member Carr is going to serve as an alternate for Vice Chair Mutzenberg. She said that she would be late to this meeting, so we'll check back. Member Hernandez.
Present.
Thank you. Member Lutz. Member Lutz.
I'm here.
Thank you. And Chair Eldridge.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. So the next item is reserved for public comment. And to make clear, this public comment is reserved for members of the public who want to make comments on items that are not on the agenda. If you are commenting on an item that is on the agenda, there will be public comment for every agenda item, but you do need to reserve your comments for that agenda item. Are there any members of the public who submitted public comment by 5 p.m. yesterday, or members of the public with their hands raised?
One second. We do have one member of the public with their hand raised. I'd like to recognize them for 3 minutes.
Yep.
Thank you. Jessica Tovar, you're recognized for 3 minutes.
Hello, this is Jessica Tovar, East Bay Clean Power Alliance. And I just wanted to say that I really believe that East Bay Community Energy needs to be regrounded into its mission of investing electricity revenues back into the community in the form of community benefits under the local development business plan, which are energy programs and projects that could build resilience, jobs, and so many more benefits to the East Bay community. And that ratepayer money is protected. That's public money, and it should be spent on the mission of EBCE. And the uniqueness of East Bay Community Energy and its local development plan came from advocacy from the community. And it's important that the EBCE board, with the help of the Community Advisory Committee, listen to the needs of the community of where their money should be invested into. Having a surplus of funds at East Bay Community Energy means that the agency is doing well in selling electricity, but that also signals that it's time to make bigger investments that build resilience, jobs, and all the benefits that we have been asking for. More importantly, to highlight that local solar microgrids, community-driven microgrids, for example, are very much what the community has been advocating for, as well as assistance and debt relief, and so many other issues that pertain to energy. And just to note that the people of Puerto Rico at this moment have been put out, their grid has failed as a result of the hurricane, the impacts of the hurricane that they are experiencing right now. And this isn't the first time. This is an ongoing pattern as a result of climate chaos. And it is because of that chaos, we really need East Bay Community Energy to recenter back into investing and rolling out programs that are reflected in the local development business plan. And that's all I want to say for now. Clean power to the people.
Great, thank you. We have one comment from Tom Kelly. Tom Kelly, you're recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Adrian. Two things that aren't on tonight's agenda. First, the Children's Hospital gift. I just wanted to let everybody know that I submitted a Public Records Act request to EBCE and to all the cities in EBCE's jurisdiction. And I haven't got everything yet, but I have noticed that Director Martinez and Mr. Chazet are working very hard behind the scenes with Children's Hospital and the members of the board to try and push this forward. You'll see it come to the XCOM at the end of this month. And this is all in spite of the fact that there's overwhelming lack of support for this particular gift. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, because it appears to me that there are Brown Act violations involved, and seeing this go to some other place to be resolved might not be in the best interest of BBCE. Second thing is Stockton has agreed to join EBCE, and surprisingly, that's on the board's agenda for approval on Wednesday, and yet there's no opportunity to speak to it specifically here at the CAC meeting. Stockton has been sold a bill of goods by EBCE. They are hoping to get emissions reductions from joining, but in fact, their emissions will increase by 3.5 times over PG&E if they do join. And my recommendation is that the board and the CAC not agree to approve the application from Stockton unless EBCE can guarantee that it can beat or beat essentially PG&E on emissions. And that is specifically called out in the Joint Powers Authority. So let's do our fellow Californians out in the Central Valley a big favor by pushing to condition the approval of their membership in EBCE by ensuring that not only they get a small discount, but also they get significant greenhouse gas emission reductions for the folks out there. And let me just say, according to what I've listened to at these public meetings, basically Stockton's been promised, emissions reductions at their port and along the major freeways through EV charging projects. So I don't know if that's all that worthwhile, but nevertheless, that's basically what they're hoping to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you. Audrey Ichinose, you're recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you. Sorry. I appreciate what the previous speakers have said. I mean, really, community input takes a lot of effort, and it really depends on a diverse community, and I really appreciate the previous speakers. My name is Audrey Ichinose. I'm affiliated with the East Bay Clean Power Alliance, as well as the statewide Alliance for Community Energy. And actually, I wanted to just suggest, this is totally different. I wanted to suggest an updating and simplification of the local development business plan. Maybe it's a reflection of how scattered we all are, but our time constraints and the increasingly complex and business of EBCE. But I find it very hard now to use the local development business plan as a framework for evaluating all the programs and the activities of our public agency. So especially, I hope that the CAC will undertake this, or, this simplification and updating, because several things have come up. For example, in the latest Flex Alert, Canary Media, which is really the successor to Green Tech Media, raised the question of who gets compensated for the demand response that was that came up and spared PG&E from calling rolling blackouts in the latest heat wave. And so this is completely voluntary, and the public, the ratepayers, should be compensated for this kind of voluntary support of the grid. There are many ways in which we could update the LDBP, but I suggest at least two simplifications. We should do an aggressive build out of DER, and that includes demand response, but also concentrating also on community solar, which will spread the benefits of solar to all the renters in our territory. So all of that depends on solar, not just solar, but solar plus storage. Thank you. I see my time has run out, and I would love to send the committee a memo of what I wanted to say in a more coherent way. But I think it's time for updating our LDBP. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much. There are no further speakers for public comment.
The mute button gets me every time. So thank you for that. And Audrey, you can forward that to Adrian, and Adrian can distribute it to everyone.
Thank you.
All right, as that is the end of public comment, we'll move into the approval of minutes from July 18th, 2022. I am seeking a motion and then any discussion.
So moved, Chair.
Moved by member Hernandez. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you. Seconded by member Landry. Is there any discussion on this item, or is there any public comment on this item, or are any members of the public have their hand raised?
There's no public comment for this item.
All right. Is there any discussion from this body?
I was not at the meeting, so I'll be abstaining.
That's okay. So with that, I would have a roll call vote.
Great, thank you. Member Landry,
Yes.
Member Hugh, Member Liu,
Yes.
Member Swaminathan, you're
Abstain.
Member Lakshman,
Yes.
Member Taria, Member Pacheco, abstain or yes?
Yeah, abstain. I
Abstain.
didn't read it. Thanks.
Great. Member Souza. Member Souza. I'll return to Member Souza. Member Hernandez.
Yes.
Member Lutz.
I'm sorry. I couldn't get the mute button. I was member Souza's here.
And
I say yes.
great, thank you. Member Lutz.
Abstain. I wasn't at that meeting.
Great, thank you. Chair Eldred,
Yes,
the motion passes.
thank you. All right, with that, we'll go into the chair report. I'm looking this way because this is where my other screen is, so I can take notes and read the reports to you. So apologies, but that's what I got right now. This is a big report back, so I'll do this as quickly as I can. The first is that that Jane has accepted a new job, and with that new job, we'll be transitioning off of the CAC, and we will miss her terribly, and she is absolutely wonderful, and we're very excited for her. I believe that she will come to the next meeting to say goodbye, but as of next meeting, Lisa will be taking her place as a full member and not an alternate, which really highlights the need to be replacing our alternates. We do know that our region will need an alternate on a regular basis, and we now have 2 alternate positions that are unfilled. So we'd really like to encourage staff to do that. And I do have a meeting later this week to talk to them about what it, accelerating that timeline instead of waiting until next year, which is the current proposal. We could not get everything onto tonight's agenda, as much as it would have been great to talk about all those things. We would have been here for 6 hours. So there are a bunch of legislative updates. I did attend the legislation and marketing meeting that was held, the subcommittee of the board. There is a full docket that shows the stance that EBCE has taken on everything and where it is in legislation, what is passed, what is been vetoed, or where it's parked. There's one particular piece that I expected to hear about, and it was mentioned, but I don't believe staff has had time yet to do an update. But a bill was passed that extended Diablo Canyon's life by 5 years. This is particularly troublesome to CCAs, as it also extends a significant portion of the PCIA. CEO Chassett did show up to talk against this bill, which we would like to extend our deep gratitude to him for that. It is a very expensive decision, but it could be a very expensive decision for us if Diablo Canyon is still allowed to be counted as a stranded asset and included in the PCIA. So it's a bad thing, and we do look forward to receiving an update on that probably at next meeting. I imagine that's when staff will have had time to touch on that. At the next meeting, on Wednesday's meeting, so you'll be able to get the legislative information on the agenda packet that went out for Wednesday's meeting. It is also online. There is also the item of Stockton joining EBCE. And I encourage you to take a look at the things that were important to them as a community as they're coming into EBCE. If the board chooses to accept their application, there are some really strong community and local requirements. It is very much in line with the values that we held as we formed this body. And if they vote to accept Stockton's application, then we look forward to finding a way to include them on the CAC as well. So that could be another discussion that's coming up that I want to give you a heads up about. And I do know that Vice Chair Mutzenberg has been in communication with the Stockton group, and that all of that seems to have been a really positive interaction. And again, I've been impressed with the requirements that they are bringing to the table. So for the last meeting, the issue of stipends came up. We had discussed it at our July meeting. Then it was discussed at the board meeting, which the last full discussion board meeting was on July 20th. They did vote to change stipends for CAC members and bring them up onto the same terms as board members. So if you receive a stipend, it will now be $120.07, which is a reflection of the $100 board stipend adjusted for the number of years, with compensation to up to 4 meetings per month if we end up having 4 meetings per month, which I cannot imagine that scenario. But the motion did pass 12-0. There was strong discussion and support for the value of the CAC. And Director Monroe requested a subcommittee be formed to address questions of public participation and compensation. And Director Marquez seconded that and requested or supported the concept of it, and also requested an update on the current makeup of the CAC, like what groups we represent, what does the outreach process look like, what vacancies are here, that kind of thing. And there were elections for the chair and the vice chair. So Chair Martinez and Vice Chair Lopez were reelected, but neither one of them will be seeking reelection next term in their actual government positions. So both of them will be transitioning out at the end of the year. There will be new chair elections after the new board is seated following the outcome of the election. So there will be significant changeover in the makeup of the EBCE board of directors. And I really encourage you, whoever the next position is, or even before then, if you can reach out to your director and have a meeting with them and get their opinions and what they think is important, to do that, especially if you're newer, and then to schedule a meeting with whoever your director is, or whoever your directors are, once the new board is seated, so that you start a relationship and communication with them. It's a really important and positive thing. I gain a lot from talking with directors in my area, so I encourage you to do the same. We're almost done. Metrics update. We've been requesting a metrics update from staff. We've actually had it scheduled a couple times, and JP is awesome and was like, look, I'm not able to bring as much attention and time to this as it's really needed. So they are posting or have posted, I'm not sure which one it is, a position for an analyst, and that analyst will be able to dedicate time to focusing on the metrics and also be able to work on other reporting needs for local programmings. Did want to let you know that we received a Public Records Request Act, and Tom, the things that you're saying around Brown Act violations and whatnot are pretty serious. So I would love to know what's happening in there. And I want to close on some good news for those of you who were here for the original CAC. We had an incredible member, Reverend Ken Chambers, and we've been sending lots of good love his direction as he was going through a kidney transplant, and that transplant was successful and he is recovering well. He received a donation from his daughter Candace, and they're both active members of the Interfaith Council, the Alameda County, and they actually just did a newspaper story on it. So just good news that one of our members is doing well, and we are really, really happy to hear that, because that is a good man. So that was as much as I could get in there, and I bet I forgot something, but I should not talk for any longer. So is there any public comment on that whirlwind of information I just threw at you?
Yes, we do have one. Tom Kelly, you had your hand raised. Just allow you to talk. You're recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Adrian. Just a clarification, Anna Olivia. In looking at the Public Records Act request, most jurisdictions responded pretty promptly. And Emeryville was actually pretty significant, because the correspondence between Chazet and Martinez was significant. Dan Calv is also participant in that process, and we haven't received anything from Oakland yet. But what I did want to say is that I'm not an expert on the Brown Act, but I am pretty sure that board members can only vote on an issue based on the material they've received in a public forum. So that's either through staff, reports, public comment, their own conversations and that kind of thing. But we've got at least 2 significant emails from Mr. Chaza to the EBCE board that haven't been made public, and in essence are advocating for the acceptance of this $15 million gift to Children's Hospital. So I'm going to leave that to the attorneys who understand this a little bit better than me. But I did want you to know that there's been a lot going on behind the scenes on this issue. And I will keep you apprised of all of it as I learn more. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. All right, so any questions from the committee? All right, so we will move on now to item 5, which is an update on integrated resource planning analysis. And who is presenting this agenda item?
Hi, my name is Marie Fontenot. I'm the Vice President of Power Resources at EBCE, and I am co-presenting with EBCE's modeler and in chief, Doug Allen.
Thank you and welcome.
Thank you. Just to be certain, Adrian, will you be progressing the slides for me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. You can go forward to the next slide, please. We are presenting tonight at the CAC and on Wednesday to the Board of Directors because we have a compliance deadline coming up on November 1st. EBCE, like all CPUC jurisdictional load-serving entities, is required to submit an integrated resource plan filing to the CPUC, as I said, on November 1st. The integrated resources plan, or IRP proceeding, is an every other year analysis that is required by the CPUC. What we have to do in this is look at our procurement plans going out 10 plus years and develop portfolios of our ideal portfolios of resources to contribute to our forecasted load under a variety of different prescriptive assumptions. This proceeding is a bit of an umbrella proceeding at the Public Utilities Commission. It is where the CPUC coordinates the resource adequacy proceeding, energy efficiency, demand response, and other behind the meter proceedings. The CPUC also coordinates the Renewable Portfolio Standard, or RPS, proceeding within the IRP, and evaluates transmission resources and the roles of a variety of different types of generating or capacity resources on the grid to look at how well are we going to meet our RPS obligations? How well are we doing as a state to meet emissions reductions goals? And do we have the types of resources we need to ensure reliability for the state as a whole? As I mentioned, it is a 2-year cycle. I sort of think at a high level as the first year as being the IPER, the Integrated Energy Policy Report, that is filed at the California Energy Commission, the CEC. That every other year filing looks at what each California load serving entity's forecasted load growth is going out 10 years. And so once there's a statewide view of how demand is going to increase, then the Public Utilities Commission takes that and each load serving entity does our IRP analysis and envisions what resources we will use to meet our growing demand going out the next 10 years. I think we can go on to the next slide. I think about the deliverables sort of in 2 different buckets. There are the CPUC deliverables. So we have to do these analyses and report to the Public Utilities Commission that based on the assumptions undertaken in the analysis, what types of resources we plan to contract with over the next 10 years. There's a narrative document that we have to write that describes the analyses that we performed, the process that we went through, the results of those analyses, lessons that we learned, and again, what types of resources we anticipate contracting with going out the next 10 years based on the analysis we've performed. And then there are two very technical spreadsheets that we have to fill out. One is called the resource data template, and it is a spreadsheet that contains thousands of rows of data about types of generating resources and transactions that we either have already entered into or forecast that we will enter into. And lastly, a tool called the Clean System Power Calculator, which calculates the amount of emissions that we forecast that we will be, that our demand will be met with, the emissions associated with our portfolio going out to 2030. Then there are the CPUC or the EBCE related deliverables, excuse me. Then there are the EBCE related deliverables. Everything that we will file with the Public Utilities Commission has to be reviewed by our board of directors and approved prior to filing it with the Public Utilities Commission. That is actually one of the rules of the IRP process, that CCAs have to have board approval of our filings before we make them. And as I said, this year's due date is November 1st. That's why we will be coming back to EBCE's board in October and going through a high-level summary of our results. And of course, we'll be posting the detailed results documents themselves. So there's the benefit, the deliverable to EBCE about, hey, here's what we have to file with the Public Utilities Commission. But this is more than just a very detailed labor-intensive compliance filing. There is real benefit to EBC in doing this analysis, and those benefits are the next three things. We can really understand the drivers of cost in our portfolio. We can look at what are the high-level resources that we think are going to be available to us. How do those resources add value to our portfolio? How do they add reliability to the grid? How are they helping us meet our different objectives? And then we can identify threats to achieving EBCE's goals. The CAC may remember that after our 2020 IRP filing, the board adopted a more aggressive emissions reductions target than is in place at the state. And so EBCE staff is working to develop a portfolio that will have zero emissions by 2030. And so what we will do in the IRP analysis is look at what are the market level events and the events that might just happen in EBCE's portfolio that could create threats to our ability to have zero emissions in 2030. And then as a result of that, what mitigation plans can we think about putting in place so that we, even if these threats materialize, so that we're in a good position to achieve our emissions reductions goals. Next slide, please. This slide goes through a timeline of the IRP proceeding. I'll skip over the majority of the details, but I will just flag that the proceeding kicked off in February of 2022. And then if you go many, many rows down, you'll see in August, the end of August of 2022 is when the last inputs to our analysis were really finalized. So there are a number of things that the CPUC requires us to include in our analysis and in our filings. That wasn't finalized until the end of August. That has left us with not a lot of time to actually finish and perform the majority of the analysis and then compile results and present it. And so, when we get a little bit further in this presentation, you'll see that we've had to make a few trade-offs in how we look at this, but we're still very confident that we're putting together an analysis and we'll be reporting something that is meaningful to our organization. Next slide. Doug, are you here?
Yes, I am.
Great.
Hello, everyone. I'm Doug Allen, Modeler-in-Chief. We're going to talk a little bit about the analytical benefits to EBCE of doing the IRP. I think first and foremost, EBCE wants to be a responsible member of the California electricity system. The interconnectedness of the system means that we are not isolated from the procurement decisions of other entities. And as we've seen in kind of the recent weeks and months, the California system is being pushed to its limit and will continue to be pushed to its limit in the coming years. So taking this kind of statewide approach really helps to ensure that we're being responsible and thinking about the state as a whole in terms of its energy goals. It also opens us up to the expertise of the people at the CPUC and other energy policy decision makers around the state through the stakeholder process. That allows us to put together plans that are aligned with the CPUC's view of what the market will look like in the future. And then beyond that, the next step in the modeling, so that's kind of our compliance filing, we can also identify if we have a different view of what the future will look like with the CPUC, what is the impact of that? If we think certain prices are going to be lower, what does that mean for our decisions going forward? And how do we balance the state's needs and our needs? The IRP allows us to look across a range of scenarios at different portfolios, different policy futures, to really maximize the chance that we can continue to provide the clean electricity that our customers want at very low costs. And that's really important in terms of you don't want to plan for just one future. We want to look at, well, what happens if things go a little bit differently than we expect, and make sure that the decisions we're making now are kind of robust to those shocks in the future. As Marie mentioned, a really important goal is identifying any barriers to our emissions reductions objectives so that we can start addressing them now and put together, again, a whole portfolio that really looks at maximizing the impact of EBCE, our customers' money, and keeps that as cost effective as possible. Finally, this year in the IRP process, we're using an open source software. This saves us money on one hand. It also allows us to potentially bring future IRP modeling work in-house, which would really expand the possibilities for us to do more scenario analysis and get a more complete picture of the California energy landscape. Adrian, next slide, please. So I'm going to go over the analytical approach and then talk a little bit about how we are kind of deploying that in the EBCE IRP context. The modeling that we're doing really comes in 3 steps. The first, you can think of it as it's the statewide look. It says, over the next 20 or so years, what sort of resources does California as a whole have to build to achieve California's emissions goals and to maintain a reliable system? And so that sets up kind of the base case, the scenario that the CPUC is asking us all to look at and file plans according to that. But it also, other things can change on the state level. Somebody mentioned the Diablo earlier is a huge potential impact on what resources look like in the state. And so we're able to do some state level modeling that says, what's the context, the statewide context that we will be operating in the future? Once we have that kind of resource build out, we go through specific years and do an hourly generation of prices. And this basically looks at every single unit in the state and looks at the price to start it up, the prices that they would offer in the market, and estimates what market prices will look like in any given hour of any given day going forward. And this is really important because as we've seen, the explosion of solar over the last number of years, that's going to have price impacts on the middle of the day. So a resource that looks really good right now might not look as good when we have that kind of statewide context of 2030 or 2035. And then the final step that we take is in the context of this California energy system modeled above, we optimize our decision making and optimize our portfolio to make sure that we are minimizing costs for ratepayers, achieving any statewide goals, any locally driven goals, taking care of our ratepayers and our disadvantaged communities. So we really then dial it down to what are the decisions that EBCE can make to prepare for the future. Next slide, please, Adrian. So as an example of this, how are we looking at some sensitivities in these 3 different steps? The first one is kind of constrained in a lot of senses for us. The CPUC requires that everyone submit a plan that's consistent with a 30 million metric ton and 25 million metric ton statewide emissions targets by 2035. The kind of internally, we are looking at the 25, the lower emissions case as our base case, and we expect to go like well beyond, as our board has set a goal of 0 emissions by 2030. We expect to go well beyond the emissions allocated to us by the state for their view of that case. We're also looking at a case, again, as I mentioned, in which kind of these ongoing capacity concerns, hot summers where people are really worried about, are we going to be able to keep the lights on, keeps Diablo around and keeps select natural fired gas plants on the system. This will not be providing electricity to EVCE, but it does change the makeup of the market electricity and the price profiles that we see around the state. From there, the production cost model takes those builds, potentially with Diablo, and we look at what are the prices going to be. And so we have our base case, but then on top of that, we also have a case in which really constrained hydro resources and high natural gas prices, potentially due to kind of ongoing supply chain disruptions, really put us in a high price scenario, because we want to make sure that we are protected against a situation where prices are a lot higher. We're not being optimistic about how our portfolio will perform. We're saying, what if things go a little wrong? Will our portfolio still be the least cost portfolio that we can supply to our customers? And then finally, when we look at the kind of EVCE specific decisions, the portfolio expansion modeling that you see on the bottom, our base case, because it is dictated by the CPUC, assumes no expansion of EVCE territory and that all of our generation projects are completed on schedule. But we also wanted to look at, what is going to be the impact? And, but when we were putting together these studies, actually, we didn't know whether or not Stockton would vote to come on. So we wanted to look at what would be the impact if Stockton comes on? What would be the impact if, even more load than Stockton came on, maybe San Joaquin County? If our electrification programs are more successful than we expect, what kind of electric load would we see then? And are we putting together a portfolio that can really perform well under those circumstances as well? And then finally, we're also looking at a case because we want to protect against things that could go wrong, in which we have kind of continuous project delays with the power plants that we are investing in. And sorry, my cat is speaking up as well. So these project delays may lead to our being more dependent on the market for more of the year. And we want to understand how exposed are we if that's the future that we end up living in. With that, I will pass it back to Marie.
Thanks, Doug. Adrian, we go to the next slide, please. I would love to take credit for this framing, but I can't. Our former CAC member and current Chief Operating Officer of Silicon Valley Clean Energy, Monica Padilla, actually once described the IRP analysis to me this way. She thinks of it, and I think that this is a great analogy. She thinks of performing an IRP as being like going shopping at the grocery store, but having a much smaller cart than you normally do or would like to have. So, we can think of the different topics that Doug just went through as belonging in 3 different aisles, if you will. Aisle 1 is the capacity expansion model. Aisle 2 is the production cost model, the high level drivers of cost in the state. And then aisle 3 are what are the EBCE specific choices and tweaks that EBCE specific things that could impact our portfolio. And these are under each aisle, if you will. We listed many of the topics that we would like to take a look at, and we would like to dive into. Doug already flagged that we have to look at a world where California as a state has 30 million metric tons of carbon emissions in 2030. We have to look at a scenario where California has 25 million metric tons of grid emissions. EBCE will still have 0 emissions in 2030, but we have to look at to be compliant with our filing, we have to look at 30 and 25 million metric ton scenarios. We wanted to look at the impact of keeping Diablo on. We wanted to look at gas. We wanted to look at global supply chain delays and impacts on new resources, like what we're actually seeing in the market right now. And then we wanted to look at a variety of different price assumptions. But as I said, our ability to perform these analyses was time limited and computing power limited. Adrian, will you go to the next slide, please? So what we ended up doing was electing to perform the analyses that we are required to perform by the CPUC, and then doing a little bit of merging of topics to try to get at the most meaningful results we can in the time allotted, recognizing that we can always go back and do supplemental analyses if we choose to use this open source software, and as we add more skilled and just more team members who will have bandwidth to perform ongoing analyses. So, on a statewide level, as I've mentioned a couple of times, we're making sure that we are running analyses that are compliant with our emissions or the state's views of what might happen with grid scale emissions. And rather than looking at just a world where Diablo stays on or just gas plants stay on, we're looking at a world where both of those things happen. Probably that's not going to be exactly what happens, but we already know Diablo is staying on for 5 more years. We are going to use the CPUC required price assumptions, and then high prices and low prices actually both create risks to EBCE. It's just the timing of the risk is a little bit different. But because we are time constrained, we are looking right now only at the impact of extremely high prices on EBCE, and then, and the entire state, I should say, because that's in the statewide production cost model. And then for the things that are related to EBCE that we have more control over, we are doing our base portfolio as required, and then we will be looking at what if just EBCE's projects are extremely delayed in coming online. This is a different world than the IL-1 global supply chain resource delays. If there are global supply chain resource delays, there would be increased emissions across the state. If there are EBCE only delays, then we will see more emissions in EBCE's portfolio for a longer period of time. But because we are still focusing on getting to zero emissions by 2030, what you would end up seeing is that we would contract for expensive resources at some point to start making sure that we actually do hit that zero emissions goal by 2030. And then what we will be doing, rather than looking at just increasing our service territory or just looking at more successful electrification than we are currently forecasting, we're sort of merging those into a more general, what if EBCE's load, what if our customer demand grows even more significantly than with just the addition of Stockton. So it's almost like looking at what if 2 Stocktons joined EBCE. That's the proxy analysis that we are currently running. Next slide, please. In terms of thinking about what the impact is of the IRP analysis, I actually intentionally skipped over this point on an earlier slide because I wanted to talk about it a lot here. This is the 3rd year that that the state is performing a coordinated integrated resource planning effort. After the 2018 filing and the 2020 filing, the CPUC did order all of its jurisdictional load serving entities to go out and do procurement of additional resources and have those resources come online by certain dates. The 2018 procurement order was a bit more general, and the total amount of generation that they ordered to have built was a lot less than what was ordered in 2020. The 2020 procurement order, as you can see on this slide, was a much larger statewide target for procurement, and the CPUC got into much more prescriptive requirements about what types of resources load serving entities had to procure. In 2022, we are mindful of the potential for the CPUC to issue a next procurement order on its jurisdictional load serving entities. And we see right now that there is a lot of interest from the CPUC in adding more long duration storage and in offshore wind development off the coast of California. So we would not be surprised if we see procurement mandates coming up for those specific resource types, perhaps as early as in 2023. Going along with that, there's a little bit of risk to EBCE as an organization. If the CPUC's procurement mandates go on in perpetuity, and if those mandates reach, high enough levels, CPUC mandated procurement has the potential to sort of take over our entire resource, our entire long-term resource portfolio, and would have the effect of just limiting our autonomy and our ability to contract with these specific resources that staff thinks are, best for EBCE, best for our customers, and most in line with our organization's reason for being. That said, we are not at that point yet. It's something that we are very mindful of, and that our policy team writes comments about and lobbies against. So we're certainly not at a point where this is an immediate threat, but it is a risk that could be on the horizon. The last thing that I want to mention that was omitted from these slides is that another part of the integrated resource plan filing is an explicit requirement that we look at the impacts of our hypothetical and proposed portfolios, specifically on disadvantaged communities. The CPUC deserves a lot of credit because they are specifically calling out the negative impacts of historic resource planning on disadvantaged communities, specifically air quality and particulate matter that has negative health impacts on disadvantaged communities. And so as all California load serving entities are talking about the types of resources we anticipate contracting with in the coming years, we have to talk specifically as well about what the impact of these resources would be on disadvantaged communities if the resources are sited near them. And so that's actually a really positive development and is very much in line with the goals of EBCE to reduce emissions and have a better effect on the communities that we serve and disadvantaged communities across the state. I believe that's the last slide of the portfolio, or of the slide deck. So I will pause here and see if there are any questions.
That was a fantastic presentation. And I just really want to thank you for that. So at this moment, we need to make sure that we take public comment before we do comment or deliberation on anything. But if members of this committee have clarifying questions, then they can ask those before we take public comment, but it would really need to be clarification as opposed to opinion or anything like that. So I see those hands went back down. All right. So do we have any public comment that was submitted by 5 p.m. yesterday, or members of the public with their hands raised?
Yes, we do. We have one public comment from Tom Kelly. Tom Kelly, I'm going to recognize you for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Adrian. For those of you who are sort of new to EBCE, I just want to point out that the CPUC requirements were always considered to be a floor, not a ceiling. And somehow or another, over the last couple of years, it seems to me that EBCE has considered just making sure that they hit the minimum requirements that the CPUC requires. So I just want to point out, in 2021, MCE Clean Energy was 98% carbon-free. Peninsula Clean Energy was 99.2% carbon-free. Sonoma Clean Power, 92% carbon-free, and Peninsula Clean Energy will be 100% renewable by 2025. So, there are CCAs in our region that are doing so much better, buying from the same power sources and providing their customers with virtually carbon-free electricity. So I do have a couple of questions and comments. When we talk about stresses on the California grid, how does buying renewable energy that is delivered and consumed outside of California reduce or support the California grid? I think Doug mentioned the stresses. So I'd like to know how that EBCE power that's purchased in, I don't know, Arizona, New Mexico, whatever, actually benefits the California grid. The second thing is, we talk about threats, and yet the Padilla report that's presented to the legislature every year has regularly shown that the cost of renewable energy has been flat and slightly declining over time. And my sense is that the reason why we may be threatened by power prices is because we are spending so much money on system power, which is primarily natural gas. So explain, if we will, where this price volatility comes in. Is it from solar and wind? I suspect not, but perhaps it is. Or is it really because of the volatility in the natural gas markets, which is an area we should be getting rid of as soon as we possibly can? Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Can you email me that list of questions that you just asked? I know you have my email, so I would appreciate it if you would email me those, and so I can make sure to include them in my follow-up. Are there any other members of the public with their hands raised?
There are no further hands raised for public comment.
All right, so we had two members of this committee who had questions, and I believe Member Souza, did you have your hand up?
I did.
All right, yours was up, and then Member Lutz, and then Member Swaminathan. So Member Souza, if you'd like to go first.
Oh, I was just gonna, I'm looking at these projections, and it was just last August, late August, that California announced that all new vehicles will be zero emission by 2035. I can't imagine what it was like to hear that, because now, of course, there's going to be a huge change in the bucket. And also, so that was my first question. The second question, really quickly, is that it's the grid. The grid is a risk, and so are all of these things also analyzed in this particular report? Because when PG does shut off the grid, it is more due to it's overheating, basically, because there's too much draw. So I don't know if that's anything that you guys do. So I'm just trying to understand. So that's it. Thank you.
Can someone respond to that, actually?
I'm going to repeat the question to make sure that I actually heard it all. There was a little bit of cutting out. The second question was basically, are all things analyzed related to the grid when we do this analysis? And I think the example of a public safety power shutoff was included. Am I framing the question correctly?
So, Member Souza, if you'd like to respond to that question. If not, I can tell you back what I've heard. She may be having some sound issues.
I just lost my Zoom. I'm sorry. Yes, it was more a question of something as large as the announcement that California made recently about all new vehicles will now be zero emission, or which is kind of alluding to electric. So that's going to change things, right?
Yeah, okay. Thank you for clarifying that. So the IRP does not look directly at the emissions reductions associated with electrifying the transportation sector. And in California, the transportation sector is already the largest source of emissions in the state. So we don't look at the impact of reducing vehicle emissions, but what we do look at is the increased demand on the electric grid as a result of transportation electrification. And so we're, EBCE, one of the reasons that we want to build out that clean corridor from Stockton to the Bay Area is because there are a lot of vehicle emissions that go through there. And so we want to make sure that not only are we creating places and opportunities for electric vehicles to charge, but we want to make sure that we are supplying clean energy so that vehicles can charge, and we're not inadvertently lowering emissions from the vehicles, but then increasing grid emissions. So we look at it in that way.
It's a job for these people.
Oh,
And they find out what.
Adrian, can you pull
Yes.
Tom Kelly? Thanks.
thanks.
Member Sousa, did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you so much. I muted.
Sure. And there's quite a lot of reasons that the grid gets turned off, one of which could be described as overheating, but there's also quite a few other things, and some of the big ones that we've had that we've experienced in the Bay have had to do, one of them is because Diablo Canyon was so unreliable as a generator source that the CPUC said they'd rather turn off the grid than rely on them to be able to produce power when it was needed. That was in a report that came out a little while back. And other, like administrative issues, I guess, where there was not a requirement for people who are even receiving resource adequacy payments to actually put that energy into the grid. Many of them actually ended up selling that to Arizona because they got a higher price than selling it into this area. So hopefully those are things they also address, because that is beyond stupid. Member Lutz, your question?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions that are sort of process related, and a couple other ones. One is there any way to push back on PUC being so tardy on getting the last parts that you need? I mean, that seems sort of ridiculous that they wait until like 2 months before your due date and still require it. So that's one question. And for your presentation to the board and actually to the CAC, there were several places, a couple places in the presentation where you talk about the statewide amount that's included of emissions or emission scenarios. What is the EBCE's expected share of those, or what happens if EBCE thinks they can do better? I mean, how's PUC decide who has to meet those statewide goals? And you sort of alluded to it, but there was what if the IRP procurement displaces EBCE's portfolio design? You know, if EBCE staff come up with a better plan than PUC, is there a way to appeal or push back to make sure that we're not just doing something because PUC had it in their head the only way to do it is their way. And then a final question is, does EBC get credit for local and behind the meter solar plus storage that EBC helps finance, like the Resilient Home Program? If, 5-10 years out, we're projecting that be significant, do we get credit for it? So those are my questions. And thank you in advance.
My pleasure. Your first question is there a way to push back on the CPUC's like late postings or late releases of requirements? Unfortunately, our ability to push back on it is limited. There will be a section in the narrative where we describe ways that the CPUC can improve this process in the future, and we will definitely be discussing the late postings of requirements. So we're going to try to catch flies with honey and not vinegar at this time. In terms of your question about EBCE's expected share of emissions, so yes, the CPUC is requiring everyone to do an analysis where the state has 30 million metric tons of emissions by 2030, and where the state has 25 million metric tons. An organization like PG&E everyone will be allotted a certain share of emissions, adding up to 30 million metric tons and adding up to 25 million metric tons in 2030. PG&E might have a hard time making the decision of what resources to contract with, because PG&E might want to max out and have as many emissions as possible. EBCE isn't in that position. Our board approved a directive in 2020 that EBCE will have a zero emission portfolio by 2030. So we are already on track to go beyond what the state is requiring. I don't recall off the top of my head what our permitted emissions are in these two different CPUC scenarios, because, and I don't remember them because I kind of don't have to. EBCE is going to zero. And so what we will be looking at, and we will report that to the Public Utilities Commission, we are achieving a zero emission portfolio in 2030. Here are the options that we have to achieve that portfolio. And then we will be able to talk about the costs and risks of achieving that portfolio. But we are working today and on a trajectory to have a zero emission portfolio well ahead of the state's requirements. Your next question was, what happens if IRP procurement displaces our preferred portfolio design? Our ability to push back on the CPUC is limited. We are jurisdictional to the Public Utilities Commission for reliability purposes. I'll give you a current real life example. The 2020 procurement mandates that the commission ordered were to contribute to grid reliability in the 23, 24, 25, 26 time period. There's a statewide and actually a global problem with supply chain, everything from diapers and baby food to lithium carbonate and solar panels are very much backed up. And so across the world, we're all having a hard time bringing new power plants online, whether it's a clean resource or an emitting resource. It's very difficult to bring these things on right now. That is part of the reason that the Public Utilities Commission wanted to keep, and the state wanted to keep Diablo online. So when it comes to procurement that is supposed to contribute to the reliability of the grid, we have to walk a very careful line. By no means do we want to say that we don't want to support grid reliability. We absolutely do want to be good stewards, but how we would do it probably would differ. And right now we are tasked with procuring resources. I will be coming to the board in October and talking about some long-term contracts for approval. I probably would not be negotiating these contracts right now, but for the fact that we have procurement mandates from the CPUC in place. I wouldn't do them now because they're more expensive right now because of supply chain problems. but we have to do these procurements to meet our compliance obligations. So our ability to push back is limited. In the future, if procurement mandates are not specifically for reliability purposes, I think we will have more ability to push back, and that's something that we will work on in partnership with our policy team. And then your last question was, do we get some sort of credit for behind the meter resources, the things that we develop for ourselves? And at a high level, yes, we do. The way that they count varies depending upon the type of the resource. Certain resources might explicitly count towards a procurement requirement, or certain resources have the impact of changing our demand shape, which then effectively lowers the forecast that goes into the Integrated Energy Policy Report, the IPER, that is like the first part of this 2-year planning cycle. And if that number goes down, then the procurement mandates that come out of the IRP process would probably be fewer and different. So the interplay is a little bit complicated, but we do get some credit for the resources we develop that are behind the meter.
That was really helpful. Did that answer your questions?
Yeah, it did. It sounds like you're trying to do all the right things, and might help if there was more pushback on the PUC where it's not as helpful. But you want to use honey instead of vinegar right now. So maybe some other people outside EBCE could use vinegar in a coordinated way.
All right, so we're going to keep a little bit eye on the time, but this is a great discussion, and I'm really grateful with how well and thoroughly you're answering these questions. It's really a pleasure. Members 1 minute on.
Yes, hi. Thank you for that presentation, a good framework of what we will be receiving. I have 2 questions. One is regarding process. When will we see this analysis back? And the other one is kind of related to Member Lutz asking the question, is accounting, if our carbon zero goal, is it on an hourly basis or is it on an annual basis?
Your first question about timing of reviewing the analysis, it will be in the October board meeting. We have to present it in October so we can get board approval of the analysis and the filing, and then make the filing on the November 1st due date. So it's crunch time, and we will be back. We will see you in October. And then the question about our emissions reductions goal, it is an annual emissions reductions goal.
Okay. Thank you.
And if y'all can put your hands down once you're done, it's helpful to me to keep stack. Member Landry? Oh, wait, did you have another question, members 1 minute on?
Yeah, just a clarifying question. So it's on an annual basis computed annually, or is it on an hourly basis for the year? I was not clear, I'm sorry.
It is computed annually.
Okay, so the total load for the year met by equivalent amount of RPS resources in the year.
Renewable and or emissions free. So, like large hydro, for example, would count.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Member Landry?
Thank you. Tom Kelly had an interesting question that I would like to ask, because I'm interested in it also. And I believe he was asking about price volatility in the renewable arena and also with gas. So could you answer those questions, please?
I have to take notes when people ask questions. Otherwise, I really forget what people are asking. So what I noted that Tom Kelly asked was, he noted that the Padilla report shows that the cost of RPS energy is flat and declining over time. And he noted that he thinks that the real threat is system power and is driven by natural gas prices. There is truth to both of those points. The Padilla report has a lagging effect. The Padilla report reports on a previous year or a couple years back of procurement. So what we saw in the transactional space 1-2 years ago is not what we are seeing today. I've mentioned global supply chain impacts, and then of course there's also the impact of inflation. And so we are not seeing prices offered for new renewable or energy storage resources that are at the level they have been offered a few years ago. If I had a crystal ball in 2020 when I joined EBCE, I would have wanted to sign a lot more contracts in 2020 and 2021 because prices are meaningfully higher now because of supply chain and because of inflation. And this will all come out in the Padilla report in the coming years, but we hit rock bottom a couple of years ago and prices are up right now. I expect that in coming years, pricing will go back down. But this is one of the times that we are buying. Tom also made the point about the impact of natural gas prices on the energy market. And he is correct that natural gas prices do drive energy market prices. Natural gas is viewed as the marginal resource. So it has the effect of setting prices in the CAISO market. And what we are seeing right now, the reason that CAISO energy market prices are so high is because natural gas prices are at like a 10-year high. Part of that is because of war in Ukraine. But it is true that the price of natural gas drives energy market prices. And so one of the reasons that EBCE enters into long-term contracts is to hedge ourselves against volatility in the CAISO day ahead and real-time market, and also in the shorter term energy market transactional space. So we have entered into a number of long-term contracts. These resources are being built and are in the process of coming online, and we will continue to enter into long-term contracts. But ultimately, the percentage of long-term contracts versus shorter term contracts that we enter into is actually governed by our risk management regulations, which are reviewed by our risk oversight committee and approved by the board. And there's some strategy that goes into how, what percentage of our demand do we want to have met by long-term contracts.
Cynthia, if it's okay with you, can I ask a clarifying question on her answer?
Sure.
Are you doing Index Plus or new contracts for the renewables?
We are doing both.
Oh,
so you can do an Index Plus contract that is from a new resource. What we are procuring right now, we are not the RFO that we have out to market and that we are negotiating contracts on are all brand new resources.
Okay, that's cool. Thank you. Member Landry, do you have any further?
No, I thank the speaker for her great report and her comprehensive answers. Thank you.
Great. So, Member Pacheco?
Thank you. I'm pretty sure the answer to my question is going to be no, but is there a way for us to structure our contracts in a way that if the supply chain issues, whether it's for natural gas or whether it's for batteries or PV panels or whatever, significantly decrease, that we get a lower price? Or is it just, are any of the people that we would be buying from able to put that in where if their prices go down, our prices go down?
The answer is actually yes. But there's a but. So a number of counterparties have offered us pricing for resources with sort of a collar pricing structure, if you will, or a top and a bottom, a peak and a floor. And so we are negotiating some contracts based on an assumed mid-range price. But if their costs go up to a certain price, then we would share in the cost increases. And if their costs go down to a limit, we would share in the avoided costs. And then if anything happens outside of that tolerance band, both parties have to discuss, do we want to go forward with this contract?
No, thank you. That's a better answer than I was expecting. Thank you.
Cynthia, is your hand still up, or do you have another question? All right, Member Pacheco, the same?
Yes, I haven't lowered my hand yet.
All right, cool. That was really fantastic. Really, I'm really grateful for everything in that. I had a little bit of a follow-up. So you're talking about we're having to sign these long-term contracts that are not an advantageous time to be negotiating these contracts because of the price of everything. And that's unfortunate. The one power that I would see there would be our ability to reduce our demand. Right now, we know that a lot of our demand is going to be expanding. We may or may not add a new city. We have some hefty electrification underway. We've got, all these things happening. So can you explain a little bit about the strategy for demand reduction, for conservation, for some of those other resources that you were talking about? It sounded like demand response, demand shift, like that kind of stuff, but beyond that actual consumption reduction. And then we will be looking at, this is an informational item for the board, correct? All right.
Correct. We will be coming back in October with the results of the analysis. This was really meant to be sort of a reminder of what the IRP is, and heads up that we'll be coming back in October with a lot of detailed information.
Great.
So I'm going to summarize your question as, how do we look at demand side resources in the IRP process, but then also what is our ability to use demand side resources for some of the procurement mandates that come out of the IRP. So demand side resources are part of the bucket of resources we can select to have in our portfolio as we plan for the future. And I lead the Power Resources team. JP Ross from the local programs team, who develops most of our demand side programs, he has been involved in the IRP process and has shared his demand side program forecasts with us, so we can plan for those resources in our portfolio in the coming years. So they will be factored into the suite of resources we forecast, we anticipate contracting with going out to 2030 and beyond. In terms of what is our ability to use demand side resources to meet some of the recent procurement mandates that have come out of the IRP process, we have the ability to contract with a limited amount of demand response for the procurement that was ordered coming out of the 2020 IRP. It's not specific to just within our local area. So we actually did go to market and look for demand side resources in our recent RFO, and we're not done with the RFO yet. So I'd rather not talk about any RFO results right now. But I will share that I would not say that there was a hearty response from the demand side community.
Okay. And then lastly, are we looking at going to like fixed price new build wind and solar instead of index plus at all?
Oh, that's absolutely part of our portfolio. We have a variety of different structures in our contracts. So some developers have only been willing to offer us index plus pricing because they want to get the energy arbitrage value from their resources, or they want to sell off other attributes. But a number of our contracts, of our long-term contracts, are fixed price contracts, including a number of our resources that are already online. The Golden Field Solar resource, the Altamont Winds, or Scott Haggerty Wind Energy Center. So we actually do have quite a few fixed price contracts in our portfolio.
That was such a good presentation. Just mad respect. And long. So thank you for sticking with us through that. And thank you for all of that.
Our pleasure.
So it's 7:27. We're gonna move into item 6. Again, thank you to the speaker, but also to the entire team who's been working on all of these issues. It's a really big thing with a lot of stuff. It sounds like is coming at you at the last minute. So deep respect for that. So agenda item 6 is the 2021 Power Source Disclosure Annual Report and Power Content Label. This is an item that is on, I don't know why it's listed as an informational item on the agenda. That's incorrect. It is on the board's agenda for approval, and ours should match the board. So who is presenting this one?
Hi there, good evening. My name is Izzy Carson. I'm a Power Resources Manager, and I'll be presenting material for EBCE's 2021 Power Source Disclosure Report and Power Content Label.
Thank you, Izzy. About how long are you thinking the presentation will take?
8 to 10 minutes.
Okay, that sounds great. We did hear this item before, so this will serve as a refresher for some folks. And if people were not at the last meeting, because it has been a minute, it will help you there. So thank you.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, and again, this item is being presented at the board meeting on Wednesday to adopt a resolution accepting the 2021 Power Source Disclosure Report and Power Content Label, and attesting to the veracity of the documents, which basically means the data is reporting it true and within the reporting requirements of the regulations. So next slide, please. To aid in the consent of this item, this presentation is going through some of the particulars of that Power Source Disclosure Program. Going to go through how we prepare and verify our filing, and then I'm going to transition to speaking about the actual Power Content Label, which is a part of the Power Source Disclosure Program. And then we'll take a look at the Power Content Label that will be going out to customers here in the next week or so. Next slide. So we'll start here with the Power Source Disclosure Program, which requires all electricity providers in California to submit an annual report that discloses the source of power that was purchased for their customers during any given calendar year. The report shows every megawatt hour of electricity purchased by source, renewable, large hydro, etc. It's reported on the Power Source Disclosure Report as a % of total retail sales. For example, 42.3% of the power for Bright Choice customers is disclosed as coming from renewable energy sources. We'll see that in a later slide. An increase from last year. And each year, this report is submitted to the California Energy Commission, or the CEC. Next slide. This is really just a flow chart of how EBCE prepares, reviews, and validates the data that goes into the actual Power Source Disclosure Report. We start with a review of the previous calendar year delivered power. This includes reviewing the renewable energy credits, or RECs, which is our currency for purchased renewable energy. We also review the non-renewable, carbon-free, and low-carbon power purchase, so large hydro, ACS power. We review the retail sales from all of our EBCE customer plans that are validated by our billing client. Staff also then verifies delivered power against contracted amounts and invoices to make sure that what's counted as delivered is the same as what's invoiced and contracted amounts. RECs are also verified in Regis, which is our REC tracking client, to make sure that what's being reported matches the certificates that are tracked in Regis. Meter data and e-tags are also reviewed for accuracy for the carbon-free deliveries. And then once all that power data is aggregated and verified, we populate the CEC templates for the actual power source disclosure report. We input all of the delivered power by the generation source, and we kind of construct individual reports for each retail plan. Once those templates are populated in a draft form, we go back and run another check of the data to make sure that what's reported on those templates traces back to what we originally verified the totals to be, just to prevent any data entry errors. And then those go through internal review. They're shared with both the executive and marketing teams for review. And then when all those reviews are complete and those templates are packaged up in kind of a final draft, and that's actually what is submitted to the CEC, and that is what becomes that power source disclosure report. So kind of background on the whole process of how it gets to that stage. Next slide, please. So the previous slides were going through the power source disclosure report and the process for submitting. So we'll go into the power content label, which is the disclosure form from the power source disclosure report. It's just a means really to share with customers in an easy to understand format where their power came from by source during a given year. The report is required to be sent to customers annually by October 1st. And visually, it's similar to a nutrition label. It displays the power mix for each of EVCE's plans. It shows the California statewide content, allows customers to compare their content to statewide power mix. And starting last year, the power content label also started disclosing emissions factor for each plan. So that's relatively new. And as discussed, these are going to go out to customers in the next week or so, as we're nearing the end of September. And next slide, please. So now we have the actual power content label that will be going out in the next week or so. This shows our emissions factor for each of our plans for 2021 at the upper left. We also have content for each of the plans by generation source as a % of total retail sales. And then we have the California power mix here for comparison as well. If we compare this power content label to power content label from last year, you'd see that the Bright Choice emissions went down from about 590 to 564 this year, and you'll see the renewable content went up. It was 39.6 last year, and you'll see that's 42.3 here. So I thought it was important to highlight that also because, as was mentioned earlier, EVC has a board adopted schedule for annual reductions in Bright Choice plan emissions and improved path to the zero emission electricity by 2030. As we're on track to meet those targets, you'll continue to see the emissions from Bright Choice decreasing over time. And that's my last slide. I think I pause there to open it up for questions. All
right, so again, clarifying questions from the committee before discussion. And then we will go to public comment. And then we will come back to the committee for discussion. Cynthia, do you have a clarifying question? Nope. All right, you'll be first when we go to the stack. I do have a clarifying question. Thank you, Izzy. That was awesome. I really appreciate it. So in on the slide where you showed the 2021 power mix, it shows that renewable 100 is listed as 50% solar and 50% wind, but that isn't 24 hours of energy. So are you just saying we're taking that amount of money and purchasing this much solar and wind, and then we're attributing the rest of the hours of generation, we're just going to take that carbon burden and put it on Bright Choice? You're muted. I do that all the time, but you're muted.
Sorry about that. I actually have my colleague Jim here on the line also, and maybe he can help me jump in, team some of these questions.
Yeah, and Olivia. Hello, everybody. So, we talk about the power content label and what its purpose is, and it's truly a mathematical exercise. So I think that your claim cannot be accurately pulled from this data, saying that, we are just taking solar and scoring renewable 100, and then we're using the brown power for bright choice. I don't think that's fully the case here, because again, when we use this data, we just basically look at it across the calendar year. Renewable 100 has this many sales, and we have this many recs from January to December to match that. That is a limitation of the power source disclosure report, but that is the reality of the metric that we're used by this.
It's not a claim, it's a question, because
Oh, I'm sorry.
when I looked at it, I saw not 24 hours of power. So I was trying to figure out where the 24 hours of power was, because it's not on the label, and renewable 100 can't be 50% wind and 50% solar. I know that it's not the actual electrons, but so what you're saying is we are not purchasing 24 hours of clean power. We're just saying we'll buy your equivalent of renewable energy, and then
Yeah,
we're not purchasing 24 hours of clean energy. Is that correct?
Do we buy 24 hours of renewable energy for renewable 100? The answer is no, we do not. But I guess the issue I'm trying to bring up is that there's no time scale on the power content label. So there's no component to it that looks at the hourly load shape and what resources do you have at that time. That's actually the segue from the IRP that directly analyzes those resources that you have by time of day. But the exercise of the power content label is purely a megawatt hour January to December for load, and then a megawatt hour January to December for purchases.
Okay. I'm asking questions that I get because I interact with the public a lot. So these are questions that are out there, like, that's not 24 hours of power. What does it mean? And then the other one that has come to me a couple times is around unspecified power. I recognize that it says that it's through open market transactions. It's not traceable to a specific generation source. Do you have it down at least enough to say this much is coming from an asset controlling supplier, or no, we don't even have that much of a breakdown?
Izzy, do you want to take that one?
Let me start on that one with the asset controlling supplier, and then maybe you can jump in, Jim. But I think that the ACS is a little bit nuanced because by definition, the ACS is not unspecified. So the generation is traced to a specific power source. They have a fleet of generation that provides firm power. But I think where it becomes a little nuanced is that, they might have a contract for a large hydro, but that power is variable. It's not around the clock. So they back it up with firm power from other resources, and those other resources might include gas or renewables or something else, but they might be getting a small amount from an unspecified source to make up that commitment because the power that they're getting is variable. So, but by definition, ACS is not unspecified as a whole.
So the ACS is not included in that 40%.
There may be a small percentage that's included in it, but generally no. Yeah.
Okay. All right. That was my last clarifier. So hi, little cutie.
Can I just add one note to that last part? So the ACS used to be rolled in the unspecified amount, but now we actually, through this reporting, take the ACS and then report it by source. And so when you see our large hydro for bright choice, and you see that kind of transient amount of nuclear on there, those are all parts of ACS. So we didn't buy nuclear. When we bought ACS, it had a small amount of nuclear in it. And then when we report that ACS on the power content label, we show it by the actual megawatt hour by source.
That's really helpful to understand what that is. Okay, cool. Thank you. Member Swaminathan, did you have a clarifier?
Yes. What does ACS mean?
It's asset controlling. Sorry, you can answer that.
It's the asset controlling supplier.
So just as a little background, what that at least the last time that I took a look at it for EBCE, which has been like 2.5 years or something, the majority, like the ACS that we were getting stuff from was mostly from the Northwest. So we were looking at between 90 and 95% in general was coming from large hydro. And then there was some, because there was a little bit of variability, there was some other stuff that could be mixed in there too, but like mostly it's carbon-free energy because of where we are positioned and who we were getting it from. I don't know if that is still accurate because I haven't dived into it that deeply this year.
So
But
is it mainly out of state power?
is it what?
Out of state power? Is it out of?
I can answer this. So ACS is a low carbon firm energy source, and I'm going to define firm energy. It means that an amount of energy that's available around the clock. And so the sources of it are in the Northwest, all the way up, Oregon, Washington area. But it is a bunch of large hydro generation facilities, and then they bundle that power, and then they back it with some generation that's around the clock, like nuclear and other things as well. But so it's generated out of state, but for the ACS here, we actually import that directly into California. So there's firm transmission for the source that makes the power move from the Northwest into California. And for the purposes of these, they are sunk in the state itself, or for most of it, I would say, for about 400 megawatt hours of it, 400 gigawatt hours, sorry.
Thank you.
Super helpful clarification. All right. So if there are not other clarifying questions, then was there any public comment that was received by 5 p.m. yesterday? And I do see that we have 2 members of the public with their hand raised.
Yes, we have 2 hands raised, Lita Dupree and Tom Kelly. I'll recognize Lita Dupree for 3 minutes. Excuse
me. Thank you again, Chair Ann Olivia. Alita Dupree, for the record, my pronouns are she and her. It's always good to be back with you. It's been a while. This is important work, and I really do appreciate the clarifying explainer about how the nuclear, this 1.7% got in the mix. That was a question I was going to ask myself. So thank you. I understand this much better now, and not going to make a big deal out of it. We want to continue to work to get the nuclear towards zero, but still, it's a lot better than buying straight fossil fuel generated electricity. I always look forward to the power content labels coming out, and BART is going to have one. It's another public agency that I follow, and I'm sure we could probably learn a lot from BART about how they are able to be 100% carbon free, and I think they are nuclear free, but we'll see what happens when their label comes out, because we can all learn from each other. So this is the beginning. We want to keep working toward 100% renewable, and I do appreciate the clarifier that all these figures are indeed on an annual basis. I mean, I'm buying solar 100% for where I'm sitting right now, but the sun isn't shining. So I'm not getting solar, but it's the renewable energy credits that are assigned to my account that allow me to claim that I'm running on 100% solar. But I acknowledge that, yeah, the electrons that I'm getting in my home right now are probably coming from brown power. So this is going to evolve, but I appreciate it. And I look forward to us getting this label finalized and letting the public know where we stand and where we're going to go. Thank you.
Thank you. We recognize Tom Kelly for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Adrian. So I just want to point out that our emissions intensity is 564 pounds per megawatt hour of CO2, 3.5 times higher than PG&E. And, frankly, it's not only embarrassing, it's threatening the future of the planet. in terms of our contribution to greenhouse gas emissions. And it wasn't always this way. In 2018 and 2019, even though we were using a different way of measuring greenhouse gases, we were way ahead of PG&E and certainly way ahead of where we are now. So I'm just, I kind of wonder, I've been talking about this for 2 years or a year and a half, and it doesn't seem to really have much of an impact. And I'm just wondering if, anybody else shares this concern, or whether or not you really think EBCE should get its act together and actually do what it was intended to do. So I have a couple of questions for Izzy. What is the total EBCE load for 2021? And how much renewable electricity was purchased and consumed outside California? And from what sources? So that's 2 questions. And the third one is, how much of the total load comes from long-term contracts? Those are actually my questions, but I just wanted to point out that the Joint Powers Authority says that we have to compete on price. We have to do better on renewables, which we are not. We're below PG&E in 2021, I think, in 2022. And a lot of those renewables are generated outside California and never provide electricity to California consumers. And the JPA says we have to beat PG&E on greenhouse gas emissions. So, what does that JPA mean if we're just ignoring it? Nobody answers these questions. Everybody just sits there and listens to what we have to say on this, and then nothing ever happens. But could somebody explain to me where I'm wrong on this? What exactly am I saying that is inaccurate, unsubstantiated, and untrue? That's all. If I'm wrong, I will be the first person to admit that I'm wrong. But if I'm not wrong, then EBCE is not doing its job. And all of us are just sitting around letting it happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. And just to clarify, we have agendized this item 3 times at your request, and the times that we've agendized it, you showed up and made comment during public comment, at which point we are not allowed to respond because it isn't agendized. So now that we are hearing comment during the agendized item, staff can make responses to you, but it has been brought up many times. And that is the reason it's a shared concern for those things, is why I'm asking around 24 hours of power, as opposed to just saying we bought some wind and solar. So staff can respond to the substantive comments there, because there were some specific ones specifically on if we have information on renewable energy that was purchased from outside of California, and the kind of the percentage of energy that comes from long-term contracts.
I actually don't have that information at the ready. I can definitely put it together and make sure that it's available for response.
I could speak to some of them kind of at a higher sense. So when we talk about energy that's sunk outside of California, I think it's pretty minimal. I'm guessing it's probably 20% or so of our total load. And that comes from the PCC2s mostly. There's some fringe stuff from attributes for carbon-free deals. But I think the takeaway this is, these numbers are high and these carry emissions, and that's put an emission burden on Bright Choice. But I believe at the same time, we've established pretty robust targets to continue a path to make our plan have less emissions. I think staff has put a lot of work into creating that path. And I think in our minds on the Power Resources team, we're looking forward down that path and having where we are now as the start point. I think that's an important takeaway that I want to impart, is that we've established pretty robust goals for EBC to get to. And right now, a lot of our energy is working towards those goals. I guess I'll speak the long-term one. So, Marie pointed out kind of the struggles that we have with getting projects online due to the supply constraints for COVID. And so, we currently have a lot of good projects in the pipeline. We have 4 online right now, 1, 2, 3, 4 renewable projects online. So we're serving probably somewhere in the range of maybe 20% of our RPS need from long-term. I'm not sure on the total sales, but it's, maybe about 10% or so. And we expect that number to go up significantly during this compliance period. There is a 65% of our RPS requirement from SB 350 that we fully intend to meet by the end of 2024. And so as we move through this 4-year period for the compliance period, 21, 22, 23, 24, is that amount of renewable energy that's serving our load will increase pretty dramatically. Sorry, no, my video shut off there. And so again, we have these projects in the pipeline. We have a lot of good projects coming, and that amount will increase significantly year over. And I think we're really proud of those projects and the fact that we're gonna be able to meet our renewable requirement from those projects that we have a long-term agreement with as well. I didn't catch the third question. And Olivia, do you know if you remember it? No.
Can I actually help here a little bit? There was a portion of the question related to the time-based nature of energy delivery, and this, what I'm about to share, is also related to some of the questions that Anne Olivia receives when she's out in the world on behalf of EBCE. It is correct that neither the RPS compliance process nor the power content label look at the delivery of energy on an hourly basis. Today we reported on the power source disclosure report and the power content label, and those are prescriptive documents that require that we report the energy that was delivered to us over the course of the year. And so it's summed up math, numerator, denominator, and these are the outcomes of that. In California at this time, there is no official accounting methodology for what other parts of the country are referring to as time-based environmental attribute credits. There is no official time-based accounting methodology in California at this time. It is something that we are keeping an eye on and monitoring progression in other parts of the country. But to date, staff is focusing on meeting our board approved targets of 0 emissions by 2030 and the board approved trajectory of having increasing volumes of renewable energy in our portfolio every year as we move towards that 2030 0 emissions target.
Very helpful response. Alex.
Hey, thank you, Chair Eldred. Alex DeGiorgio, Public Engagement Manager. There's just one point I wanted to mention in case it hadn't been mentioned yet, and that was in 2021, EBC's non-nuclear carbon-free power supply was actually higher than both PG&E's and the statewide average. So if you set aside the nuclear power, that's a substantial portion of PG&E's supply and a meaningful portion of the statewide supply. If you cancel that out, then EBC is actually ahead. So just want to make sure that was clear to everyone that may not have.
That's a very helpful addition. Very, very helpful. And great notes on this one, y'all. This is cool. Okay. Thank you. I see. Oh, we have one more member of the public with their hands raised.
Yes. Audrey Ichinose, recognize you for 3 minutes.
Thank you. I wanted to say a couple of things. And actually my question went to the very point that Alex DeGiorgio covered. And that was how PG&E's nuclear power is booked. Do they get full credit for, I don't know, all of Diablo Canyon generation? So that's good that that's clarified. But I also wanted to appreciate Tom Kelly. It really requires persistence to get kind of practical, everyday understanding of very complex and technical information. So keep on going, Tom. But yeah, if anybody wants to elaborate further about how PG&E gets, how much of that nuclear generation PG&E gets credited for, that would be helpful, but it's not essential. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further hands raised for public comment.
Excellent. We will go to members of the committee and would like to echo the sentiments of Audrey's. Tom, it's amazing that you are as engaged. We have many members of our public that are really engaged, and it makes a huge difference, and that is why we are here. So thank you for your ongoing caring and dedication and trying to help keep this organization that you were fundamental in founding moving in a direction that we all believe in. We need all of these voices. So thanks. Member Swaminathan?
Yes, hi. That was very helpful look at the table. I'm just trying to connect the IRP goal of 100% renewables and power content label. What would a power content label look like in 2030? Would the bright choice?
Do you mind just dropping your camera for a second? Your voice keeps breaking up, and I'm having a hard time hearing.
Okay, is this better? Is this better?
Yes, it is.
Okay. The power content label, what would it look like when we reach the 2030 goal? Would the bright choice be 100% renewable at that time?
Can I go ahead and take this question? So the bright choice would not necessarily be 100% renewable in 2030. It would be 100% carbon free. So it would be more renewable than the state target in 2030, which, oh gosh, sorry, there are so many numbers in my head. I want to say it's 60% in 2030. It might be 50. So bear with me, that number, take that number with a grain of salt. So our bright choice content would be greater than the RPS requirement, and the remainder would be made up with either renewable or other carbon-free resources. The carbon-free resource EBCE is allowed to buy currently is large hydro.
Got it. Okay. And the carbon emission intensity also would be 0 in that power content label, the right choice.
That is correct.
Thank you.
The non-renewable carbon free, because the renewable carbon frees are also allowed to be bought. Member Swaminathan, did you have an additional question? Nope, you're good. Okay. Member Lutz?
Yeah, let me find my mute button. The question I've got is, this is the confusion of annual versus hourly adds to it, but this is, the power content label is a fraction of energy from the different supply sources. Would it be possible, not for the power content label, but maybe for the CAC and the board, to have a fraction of power, a fraction of energy over the year from the different contracts or different classes of contracts? Long-term ones that EBCE helped develop, ones, how much of that energy comes from the California mix, how much comes from, PG&E, how much comes from other providers. I feel like I'm asking a question that doesn't make sense, but feel that I'm not understanding how the various contracts EBCE has with different suppliers map onto the power content label. And maybe it has to be suppliers of energy versus suppliers of RECs. I don't know if those are split out either. So I'm seeing that, yeah, it looks like the energy's clean, but how much of it comes from things that EBCE helped get built and how much of it comes from just purchases on the open market, how much of it comes from, we don't know where it comes from, but it comes with a REC, so we assume it's clean.
Izzy, do you mind if I take that one? We do have all of those details. We don't have it on us right now, but I will go ahead and take that request back and discuss it with senior leadership and see how best to present it in a future meeting.
That would be amazing. Jim, does that answer your questions?
Yeah, that would be great. That would be great.
Thank you. Yeah, we really would like that. Seeing no other hands raised and recognizing that it's 8:02, so these two topics are pretty well integrated, right? Like they definitely touch on each other. And I'm wondering, kind of summing up a bit of what I'm hearing Tom say and some of the other comments that were made. You just made a projection into future years about what our mix is going to look like, more or less. Can we get an idea of the projected power mix for the coming years? And like, you have to have that because they have to be able to analyze it. Like, can we see that?
I could speak to this one. I think the best source of that would be the April board item where the long-term plan was adopted. And what that shows is annual renewable and carbon-free percents for Bright Choice. Now, that's not going to have the source level data because there's still some uncertainty on where the renewable will come from, but that will give you a really good estimate of the renewable content and the carbon-free content for Bright Choice that we're planning for. And that really, I think, is a pretty detailed report.
Would it be possible to get a little bit more? I don't mean like, we're going to sign a contract with this guy, but like, we're going to have a better breakdown. Like, we're going to try and have this much wind and this much solar and this much geothermal. And now we've got this possibility of required offshore wind and that like this much is going to be in California, that kind of thing. Like, could we get a bit more detailed breakdown than that? Because the April report is great. It is, but it's not necessarily answering some of these questions.
Jim,
I think lucky for, I was just going to say that, Marie, you go ahead. I think we're going to say the same thing anyway.
Sure. So a lot of what you're describing will be in the IRP analysis, but take it with a grain of salt because it's going out, looking at the next 10 years. It would not be in EBCE's best interest to give you our snapshot for the forecast for 2023 because a portion of our supply we transact on a shorter term basis. So we might transact a year ahead or a few months ahead. And we don't want to give a whole lot of information to the public about what that open position is because it would actually negatively impact our ability to transact at optimal prices. So unfortunately that 10-year look on a forward basis is probably the best way to provide visibility to the public about how we're thinking about things going forward, and then updates on what we have actually done so that we have the ability to transact in a way that obtains best prices and the resources that our customers are actually looking to have in our portfolio.
Maybe we can have a meeting after, not tonight, clearly, but maybe we can have a meeting and I can just get a little bit better understanding of some of their parameters because I think it would help that. Jim, did you have another question or is your hand still up? All right. That pretty well Alex.
Sorry, I just want to make sure I didn't miss it. Are we on staff announcements?
We're about to be there.
Okay, I'll wait. Thanks.
We're about to be there. Awesome. If I I want to actually talk about this at the board meeting and not have it in the consent agenda, just to summarize a couple of the things that I think have come out pretty strongly here and commend staff. If this is an action item for the board, so, but it is in the consent agenda. Am I correct in that? Is that still where it is?
Yes, it is.
So I would like to discuss this, at least touch on it during the board meeting if this committee is comfortable with that. Because there's a lot of really good feedback that came from here that I think is positive, and I really am happy about some of the information that is going to come back to us. I'm not seeing very many heads, but the only one I do see just nodded, so that was good. All right, and that will conclude that item. So we have the ability to make a recommendation on this. I don't feel like we need to, if you guys are just comfortable with me summarizing stuff. All right, cool. So then we will go on to the next item, which is CAC member and staff announcements, including requests to place items on future CAC agendas. A quick shout out to our awesome board clerk who actually keeps the best track of that of any human I have ever seen. You're awesome, Adrian. So Alex, I think you were very excited for this portion. Do you want to share?
Yes. Thank you, Chair Eldred. Yes, I know that there was a bit of a spoiler already during the initial public comment, but I've been looking forward to announcing that the City Council of Stockton voted unanimously last Tuesday night to seek membership in EBCE's Joint Powers Authority and service area for service to begin in 2024, should our board approve it. So the decision was just made on Tuesday. I don't think there would have been time to develop a staff report and add it to tonight's agenda. So I wanted to make sure I was here to tell you that occurred. And the fact that it was unanimous from that council is also quite meaningful. And they've been looking at this for the better part of 2 years. So they've definitely done their homework here. So that will be on Wednesday evening's board agenda. Item 11.
Thank you, Alex. Cynthia?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. In the July minutes, which of course you just said Adrian does a good job of capturing all our comments. I had requested that we review the in-house call center for a future agenda item. And so I don't know if it's possible to put that on next month's agenda or not. But I saw that there was an announcement that SMUD may be hiring more customer service representatives. So that would, in my mind, potentially conflict with our vision of having an in-house call center. So I'd like to see it agendized, please. And I know we're not talking about many positions, but the vision was to have an in-house call center. So I'd like to see where we are with that.
I have, just so you know, I have requested an update from staff on that, and it will be getting agendized. I'm not sure if it will be next month's or not, but we are pushing for that because not only was it the vision, it was an all-out civil war. And it was one of the most hotly contested things that resulted in breaking of contracts and lawsuits and all sorts of stuff. So yes, this is an important item and we have not forgotten. Thank you for bringing it back up. Adrian has a list that he keeps all the agenda items on, and we have followed up with staff on that. So I look forward to getting you an answer to that shortly.
Thank you.
Yeah. And thanks for tracking all this stuff, Cynthia. It's awesome. Adrian?
Yes, I just wanted to introduce the CAC to our new board clerk assistant and receptionist, Rice Ngoma. She's joined me in this meeting, and I just wanted to make sure that that we are all introduced to her. We are very excited to have her at EBCE. She is coming to us from UC Berkeley, where she just graduated with a BA in Legal Studies and African American Studies and Korean Studies. And so I just wanted to welcome Raisa to the CIC.
Welcome. Do you want to say hi?
Hello. Just to clarify, African American Studies and Korean minors. Just so no one thinks I BA'd. But nice to meet you all, and I'm excited to be here.
We are thrilled that you are here. Thanks so much. And so glad that Adrian gets some support because he's a rock star and also does way too much. Ernie? You're on mute.
Yeah, so apologies. I should, after all these years, know Robert's rules, but there are 2 items. Actually 3 items. One, I had asked repeatedly for a staff report on union job creation, and I didn't catch last board meeting, so I don't know if that was discussed, but I believe either last meeting or the meeting before we actually officially asked again. So I would just like to know the update of when we might expect the union jobs. Well, a jobs report that includes union jobs breakout. So that's one issue. Another is I'm hoping that the chair, and I'm assuming, Ann, that you'll be representing at the board meeting. I'm sure the agency and other CCAs are well into the conversation about what we do about the extension of Diablo Canyon, but it's 5-year extension is going to cost us tens of billions of dollars. CCA is tens of billions of dollars. And since this was a governor, this was at the governor's, manipulations with the co-signing of the legislature, whether or not one of the things that we can do is ask if there's a reduction in the PCIA from the Diablo Canyon extension to CCAs in some manner. This is probably something that they're already talking about. But we are being mandated by the governor and the legislature to pay additional billions over the extension of 5 years. And since that's their decision, perhaps CCAs can be cut some kind of jubilee or reduction of PCIA costs. Third issue is we did make a motion to ask that a public process be created by the board for the allocation of the $15 million that from executive fiat is, been co-signed to children's possibly. I, along with some other people, have been from prior to the creation of EBCE, we built into this innovation and responsiveness to the community and think outside the box and local benefits, but nowhere in all those years of creation and of existence have we ever talked about funding a hospital or healthcare, as wonderful and absolutely necessary and vital to the community that is. I believe the Overton window has been so moved by all coming out of the blue, a $15 million grant going to Benoff, that I'm afraid of where the conversation currently centers. And again, would hope for an update on the formation of a public process for $15 million in grants for community benefits. And that's it.
Just as clarification, I think that the unfortunate bit of legislation, and I haven't finished doing a full analysis on it myself. I'm looking forward to staff's version of that. Looks like Diablo would be continued to be counted in the PCIA, and I would also love to hear what staff is doing about that. But my guess was that they haven't created a plan yet, but we do look forward to getting that update, and I'll be going up with that one enthusiastically.
One last comment on that. I'm sorry, Chair, is that I don't think I said this. So I'm sure that there are already conversations going about that, but running a trailer bill, that by January we could get, there's ways that we could get CCAs if we had the political support to have the PCIA mitigated, at least, including like immediately starting work on a trailer bill. And I just imagine that's probably one of the things that are being talked about, but communicating that is something that came from the CAC as well, to push those conversations along about running a trailer bill to address the PCIA.
Yeah, I'll connect with you after to make sure I get this right for Wednesday. Thanks. Awesome list, Ernie. Ed?
Hey, Chair. Hey, just want to give you a shout out in regards to helping getting the CAC parity with the board. So thanks for bringing that news back and moving that attention to us so we can recruit more members on this committee to want to serve and offset their time and energy in making EBCE a better CCA for the community. In regards to one more item, I was just looking at staff diversity. We talk about parity not in pay, but the diversity representation of the staff. I'm just curious to understand where staff is at. The importance, just really highlighting the importance of inclusive hiring in the workplace, not only from the entry level, but to the senior level. And I know based on facts and information that, a lot of organizations lack diversity at the senior level management. It's great to bring it at the beginning, but we want to see that grow. So what are the tools or techniques being applied? Is it more about who you know, or is there a comprehensive outreach plan? Would like to see the details. And so it'd be ideal to have parity to the residents who we serve in the community, again, from entry level to senior management. So again, understanding the importance of inclusive hiring, the practices at EBCE, and going from the entry level to senior level. Just want to understand that. If there's a way we can get information on that in the future or bring that to the attention of the board.
That sounds like a really solid thing and can be put together with the jobs report. And I know that we have lost some really good staff because of lack of diversity, especially through the senior level. So thank you for bringing that up. It sounded like you had that written. Can you email it to me?
I will send it over.
I love how prepared you are. It's really nice.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So y'all rule, man. This was great. Somehow I've adopted the word y'all. That's funny. So, okay, that was a lot. You guys are great. Again, a quick thank you to Adrian also for organizing cards and whatnot. I would like to send one to Jane. So if we can organize that, that would be really helpful because she's awesome and has done such an incredible job. And really excited to welcome Lisa as a full member. So I think that we did it only 18 minutes late. That was a seriously full agenda and a really good discussion. Member Swaminathan, thank you so much for your comments. They were super on point, and sorry that the internet wasn't quite strong enough there, but your questions were really solid. If you could also email those to me, I would like to make sure that they are included in the presentation. So thank you. With that, we are going to adjourn to Monday, October 17th at 6 p.m. And any item that is on the board agenda that we did not take a stance on tonight, you are welcome to go to the board meeting and make your comments. Please remember that you have to do that as an individual and not as a CAC member, but you are welcome to go make those comments if you would like. So thanks everyone, and we'll see you in October.
Great.
Thank you.
Adrian, if you could send me the copy for annotation.
Yes.
Thank you. All right.